Good day, everybody. This is Jim Sloman speaking. I'm going to beat the inflation drum again today because it's the single most important thing that in the financial world anyway, we all need to understand, in my opinion. Why am I beating the inflation drum? Let's start with a simple example. In 1945, the average price paid for a house in the U.S. was $4,600. $4,600. Perhaps some of you real old-timers can remember buying a house for about that much in 1945. Now let's fast forward to today. The average price of a house now in the U.S. is $291,000. $291,000. That's even after the big pull-off. Now that happens to be an increase of over 6,000%, which shows you how even small amounts of inflation can make such a difference over the years. So why am I beating the inflation drum now? Because the process is accelerating. We're now entering the end game, the beginning of the end game, where the process accelerates faster and faster. And why do I say that when the government says that core inflation, where you strip out food and energy, is only 0.8%. 0.8%. Less than 1%. Sounds pretty good, doesn't it? Close to zero. No wonder the Fed says it's worried about deflation. Of course, that 0.8% number means stripping out energy and food prices, which is fine for people who don't eat or don't drive or don't heat their homes. Meanwhile, back in the real world, the rest of us have to pay those rising prices for food, gasoline, heating oil, and so on. But it doesn't stop there. As people smarter than I have pointed out, the government uses a thing called hedonics to manipulate its inflation statistics. Let's say you bought a computer this year for $1,000, and you also bought one 3 years ago for $1,000. Same price, right? Not according to the government. According to the government, since this year's computer has a faster chip and better graphics, in effect you paid a much lower price, say $500. But wait a minute, you say. On my credit card, I was billed $1,000 3 years ago and $1,000 today. But in the Consumer Price Index statistics, it's computed that you paid a much lower price today than you did 3 years ago. Now apply that same methodology to washing machines, cars and trucks, clothes with microfibers, products with nanotechnology. Using hedonics, the government says that prices are going down for lots and lots of things. But wait a minute, you say. The prices I'm actually paying at the supermarket and the gasoline station and the insurance broker and so on are going up a lot. Well, too bad, says the government. You must not be reading our statistics. This is compiled by shadowstats.com. This is the official inflation statistic, the CPI, and currently, according to the government, it's 1.4%. But every succeeding administration since 1980 has been manipulating the statistics so that they look lower than they actually are. And what ShadowStats does is they compute the inflation statistic as it used to be measured before the government started monkeying around with the statistic to make it look lower. And if you do that, the actual rate of inflation right now in the United States is 8.9%. Well, so what, you might say? So the real rate of inflation is 9% instead of 1.4%. So I'm paying a bit more. What's the big deal? The big deal is that A, the process keeps accelerating, and B, it affects all other statistics. Take GDP, for example, the gross domestic product. The most basic level of economic activity in the United States. According to fourth quarter 2010 statistics provided by the government, the annual nominal growth rate of GDP in the U.S. is 4.2%. That's the nominal figure before it's adjusted for inflation, 4.2%. Now, to get the real GDP, you subtract inflation, which according to the government, the CPI, is 1.4%. Okay, subtracting 1.4% from 4.2%, you get 2.8%, which supposedly is the real inflation-adjusted rate of growth of gross domestic product in the U.S. right now. Not great, but not terrible either. We're muddling through, right? Well, not so fast. If the real rate of inflation is 8.9% right now, and we subtract that number from the nominal growth rate of 4.2%, we get negative 4.7%. That's right, real GDP is actually contracting at a 4% annual rate right now. The difference in the rates of inflation causes a swing from the 2.8 reported real GDP growth, the number you hear all over the media, to a contraction in growth of 4.7%. The U.S. economy is actually seriously contracting. Do we begin to see why the real rate of inflation is such an important number? And it's not confined to the United States. This acceleration is happening all over the world. If we want to see where the U.S. is heading, probably the best place to look is Argentina. The official rate of inflation in Argentina right now, according to the government, is 10.9%. Wow, that's pretty high. But wait, according to Ecolatina, which is the rough equivalent of Shadow Stats, only in Argentina, the real rate of inflation in Argentina right now is 26.6%, about 2.5 times what the government says it is. And of course, this discrepancy between the official statistics and the real statistics is happening all over the world. Pick your country. China, India, Russia, Venezuela, France. Pick your country. It's happening everywhere. And of course, too, rising prices for food and energy and other things affect the poor most of all. The poverty rate in Argentina, according to the government, is 12%. Private economists say that the real poverty rate in Argentina is more like 30%. It also affects anyone who's living on a fixed income. It affects insurance companies and pension funds who have large fixed income investments to satisfy their actuarial requirements. And it affects the middle class who find it harder and harder to keep up. That's why, as the inflation process proceeds, a society divides more and more into the rich and the poor, the well-off and the struggling. Statistics in the U.S. and elsewhere bear out the fact that this is exactly what is happening. And rising inflation affects the political process. Why are people in Egypt and elsewhere in the Middle East rioting now? After all, Mubarak has been the dictator in Egypt for 30 years. Why now? In part because of rising food and energy prices. People are finding it harder and harder to make ends meet, and they're demanding a change. We're going to see more of this. And as we mentioned last time, the inflation process is always blamed on something else than the real culprit. In Argentina, for instance, inflation is blamed by the government on greedy companies. In Venezuela, where the official rate of inflation is now 27%, and the unofficial rate is at least double that, inflation is blamed by the government on speculators. And so it goes. Are resource shortages beginning to affect prices? Of course. Are weather extremes caused by a heating planet beginning to affect prices? Of course. Shortages, floods, droughts, and so on all have an effect. But when you see prices rising across the board, affecting everything, then you're right to suspect the hidden hand, the real culprit, money printing by governments, which is going on by governments all over the world. Nowadays, though, since we're so sophisticated, it's electronic money printing. And I want to show you this chart. This is the national debt from 1940 to the present. And it's really self-explanatory. Right in here, 1971 is when Nixon took us off the gold standard. And the money supply, by the way, if I showed you a chart of that, looks very, very similar. It's just rising exponentially like this. When government debts are huge and increasing, it's so much easier politically for a government to issue more debt and print money to cover it than it is to cut expenditures. It's so much easier politically for a government to issue more debt and print money to cover it than to raise taxes. It's so much easier politically for a government to issue more debt and print money to cover it than to default on the debt. But no government will ever admit that printing money is the real cause, because then the game would be up. They will always blame it on other factors, and the media helps them in this by always blaming it on the cause of the day. That's all for today. May every possible good fortune be yours. Bye-bye now.